Okay, as we discussed in class, the beginning of Sefer Shemot presents us with a problem in that it seems to be telling us stuff that we already know. We're told over here, "Ve'ele Shemot b'nei Yisrael habe'im Mitzrayima et Yaakov yishuvei tova'u." These are the names of b'nei Yisrael that came down to Egypt. Each one came with his family. And the next few psukim, as you recall, we discussed inside, they simply list a whole bunch of names: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun. This is all stuff that we already know. So why is it then that the Torah over here is just repeating stuff that we already know? So Rashi is bothered by this, and Rashi therefore comments, even though the Torah already enumerated them, listed them, counted them when they were alive by their individual names. In other words, in Bereishit it told us who they were. Chazar umina'an achar mitatan. The Torah nevertheless returned again and counted them again, enumerated their names again after they died. Lahodiach chibatan shenimshulu kakochavim. To tell us their chiba means love or being beloved. To recognize to inform us how beloved Bnei Israel were to Hashem. Shenimshulu kakochavim. Bnei Israel are so beloved to Hashem that He considers us like stars. And here you have a pasuk from Yeshayahu, Shemot b'mispar u'machnisan b'mispar u'vishmotam. Stars. I don't know if anyone here is very into astronomy. If you're not into astronomy, it's kind of hard to relate to this Rashi. But if you are into astronomy and you get really excited to look at the sky and notice, where's the Big Dipper and where's the Little Dipper and where's Orion and this constellation and that constellation. So picture that feeling that these stars aren't just a bunch of dots for someone who really appreciates astronomy, but the guy who really loves astronomy, even though he already knows what he's going to see, he still enjoys again and again looking in his telescope and examining all these different constellations just so he can get another look at this group and that group. So Rashi says that's how Hashem relates to Bnei Israel, that He is constantly counting them, just like it says in Yeshayahu, Hamotzi b'mispar tzva'am u'chulam b'shem yikra. It describes God's relationship with stars, that He counts them one by one and gives each one its name. Right? It's true. Right? We have all these names that have been given to all these stars out there. The sun is a star, Alpha Centauri is a star, and all these other stars out there have names as well, which I don't personally claim to know. So according to Rashi, just as someone who, if you love stars, you keep on looking at them and counting each one. Some people love their money so much, they're constantly counting exactly how much money they have. Well, God, what does He love? He loves Bnei Israel, and so He keeps on counting them. He already counted them in Bereishit. We already know there were 70 people who went down to Mitzrayim. We already know all their names. Nevertheless, God repeats all this here. So according to Rashi, the repetition of the names here tells me nothing new in terms of new information, but the very fact that the Torah tells us something without any new information, repeats the same thing again, that shows how much Bnei Israel are always on God's mind. He loves us so much that He keeps on counting them. Rashbam then comes along. Rashbam is Rashi's grandson. Rashi died in the year 1105, and it's believed that Rashbam was about 20 years old then, even though we don't know exactly. He was one of Rashi's oldest grandchildren, his oldest grandson, as far as we know. And Rashbam, so he knows Rashi, he knows what his grandfather says. He offers a different take. He says, Ve'ele Shemot, Mipnei sherotzeh lefaresh v'lomar uvnei Yisrael paru v'yishutzu v'gomer. He says the Torah is trying to set up something here. It knows that we already know the names of Yaakov's kids. We already know there were 70 of them. But soon it's going to explain and tell us about how they were fruitful and multiplied, and there were so many of them now that Paro was concerned about this, and he tried to enslave them. In order to set the backdrop, the Torah is quickly giving us some information here about the names of Yaakov's kids, which it knows our gut reaction is going to be, why are you telling me this? I know this already. But the Torah wants to tell it to us again in order to refresh our memory, so we'll have this fact that there were 70 kids, grandkids, 70 descendants of Yaakov fresh in our mind, so that we'll appreciate what suddenly happened. It had to repeat. Hutrach lichpol, kefal means double, so it had to repeat, to tell us a second time, to say again, When they came down to Egypt, they were only 70. But after that opening initial generation in Egypt died out, they kept on having kids and more kids and more kids. And that's why when this new king came along, he tried to outsmart them and find a way to prevent them from having so many kids. Nevertheless, it didn't work for him, right? He tried, but it didn't work. In order to understand that whole story in which Paro was trying to reduce the number of Jews, and yet the Jews keep on having more kids anyway, you have to first appreciate that they came down with only 70. If they'd come down with tens of thousands of Jews, then the fact that there are a lot of Jews in Egypt now wouldn't be a big deal. It's only because they came down with 70 that suddenly this huge number of thousands and thousands of Jews catches the Egyptians' attention and prompts Paro to think he has to do something about it. And so there's a fundamental difference, there's a couple of fundamental differences between the way that Rashi and Rashbam approach this. Rashi doesn't see any functional, any practical reason for the fact that there are so many Jews here. Rashi doesn't see any functional reason for repeating the names of Yaakov's kids, and so Rashi instead tries to derive a nice lesson from the fact that they were repeated for no good reason. The fact that they were repeated for no practical reason teaches me that Hashem loves them so much. And so he keeps on thinking about them and keeps on counting them again, even though there's no real reason to mention them again. Whereas according to Rashbam, if the Torah goes around repeating this information that we already know, it must be repeating it for a practical reason. And for Rashbam, the specific practical reason is to set the stage for the immediate next thing in the story. Now, this method, this way of dealing with seemingly useless information by explaining that it's meant to set up something that's going to come soon, this is one of Rashbam's favorite methods. It's not a coincidence that Rashbam is the one who suggests this over here. Rashbam refers to these psukim where we get some information that seems useless, seems meaningless, and then shortly afterwards it becomes meaningful. He calls it the Cham Hu Avi Kanaan phenomenon. Where did that come from? Look in Bereishit chapter 9, we're told over there that when Noach and his kids left the Teva, down here in Pasuk Yirchet, Noach had 3 kids, Shem, Cham, and Yafet, and by the way, Cham was the father of Canaan. Now at that point, the flood just happened, these people left the Teva. Who cares that one of them also happens to be the father of a guy named Canaan? So Rashbam says, that's seemingly pointless information. But a few psukim later, I don't know if you learned this story, depending where you went to school, they might have skipped it when you learned Noach originally. But when Noach comes out of the Teva here, he gets drunk, he exposes himself, and 2 sons, Shem and Yafet, cover him up, whereas Cham seems to have been mocking him. And so Noach, eventually, the alcohol wears off, and Noach says, Arur Canaan, cursed be Canaan. Says the Rashbam, if we just read this story, we'd be like, why is Noach cursing out somebody named Canaan because of what somebody named Cham did? And therefore, in order to make sense out of that, the Torah had to mention earlier, by the way, Cham was Canaan's father. So now we understand that when Noach says, Arur Canaan, the reason he's cursing Canaan is because Canaan represents the descendants of the guy Cham who did something wrong. And so Rashbam is very fond of this idea that sometimes a pasuk gives us information that we think is useless, but then a little bit later we realize that phrase was setting up a later part of the story. So here too, in our story in Shemot, we see a repetition of the names of Yaakov's kids, and we're like, that's pointless. Why do I need that? But then a few psukim later, when we see Paro freaking out over the fact that there's so many Jews in his kingdom, right, down here in Pasuk Chet and Tet, right, a new king comes along, and in Pasuk Tet he says that there's too many Jews in my country. So now we understand why Paro's all worked up about that, because we say, oh, I get it. Not that long ago, there were only 70 Jews up here in Pasuk Hey. And so suddenly, when from 70 Jews, there's, thousands, tens of thousands, we understand why Paro is freaking out. Ramban comes along over here. Ramban, like Rashbam and Rashi, is bothered by the fact that we already know about Yaakov's family. Ramban tries to explain it in a bit of a different way. Ramban tells us over here that Katuv Yitzeh The Torah wants us to understand that the idea of us being in exile, us being in galut, which we saw in Ramban's introduction, he thinks is an important theme in this book, that began the minute Yaakov and his 70 descendants went down. Ki az galu b'rosh golim, kasher perashti. Already then they go down into this galut. Therefore, and therefore the Torah is giving us a flashback to that story in Bereishit Memvav, where Yaakov came down with all his kids to Egypt. We're going to do that same flashback, Bereishit Memvav. That's why I love this website, alhatorah.org, because you can just click and flash back. Over there we were told that Yaakov came down to Egypt with all his descendants. And so right then in Bereishit, that's basically when our state of galut in Egypt begins. But Bereishit has some other stories it still wants to tell us about Yaakov dying and Yosef's brothers being scared that Yosef would take revenge against them after Yaakov died. And so now the Torah is coming along and saying, listen guys, we need to refocus ourselves. I know you already know that Yaakov and his kids went down to Egypt and there were 70 of them, but it's not in the forefront of your thoughts right now because you've been reading all these other stories about Yaakov's death and Yosef's death. Well, listen, we need to refocus. This new book is going to be a book about Galut, and so we need to start that off by reminding you of how we got here. How did we get to be in Galut? Yaakov and 70 kids went down to Egypt. Ramban then has an interesting comment about Rashi. He says, look, still in the Ramban over here, he says, Rashi katava afal an b'chayim chazar right? Rashi wrote, and he just quotes for you exactly what it says in Rashi over here. And Ramban says, where did Rashi get that from? Ela divrei agada. This is from the Medrash. If you look it up in Midrash Shemot Rabbah, you'll see in Shemot Rabbah it makes the exact same comment. And again, Al Torah is wonderful. They give us this Medrash Shemot Rabbah. So we sometimes think of Rashi making things up, but often Rashi is basing himself on earlier sources. And Ramban says, I agree with Rashi, but I also disagree. Because that Medrash, him dvarim shel emet, it's words of truth, be'inyan chivuv hakadosh baruch hu machavevan. The idea of that Medrash, that God loves the Bnei Yisrael, and that's why he's always mentioning their names, is a true idea. But the connection of the psukim and the vav, right? You begin a book with and, that implies it's connected to the previous book. All that, the fact that we're having this flashback to the previous book of Bereishit, and talking again about Yaakov and his kids going down to Egypt, the simple meaning of that, says Ramban, is to set up the book of Shemot. This book of exile and redemption. In sum, what I want to observe is that these three Mefarshim, Rashi, Rashbam, and Ramban, each of them deals with this seemingly useless repetition of Yaakov's family and the fact there were 70 of them coming down to Egypt. Each of them deals with it in a way that's characteristic of that person's general approach to how they study psukim. Rashi often will observe a problem in the text and resolve it by citing a medrash that teaches a very profound idea. So he's bothered by this repetition. Why do we have to know again who Yaakov's kids were? And he resolves it by citing a midrash with this very profound idea about God's love of Bnei Yisrael. This is a theme that Rashi comes back to a lot. If you go to the beginning of the book of Bamidbar, you will see that the book of Bamidbar also begins with a census, and Rashi over there is also bothered by the fact that it seems repetitive. Why do we have to count all the Jews again? And Rashi again there says, Mitoch chibatan lefanav naotan kol sha'ah. Because of the chiba, the love of Bnei Yisrael that Hashem has, that's why he's always counting them. Rashbam doesn't like to just draw things from the Midrash, and therefore Rashbam instead gives an explanation he's very fond of, that when the Torah gives you useless information that seems useless, it's often setting up something very soon where the information will become relevant. So it seems useless to give us all the names of Yaakov's kids again and say there were 70 of them, but it's setting up the fact that right afterwards, the explosion in their population from 70 to thousands is going to lead to Paro wanting to enslave them. Ramban, you see how much longer Ramban's comment is? He tends to deal with larger themes. So for Ramban, it's not giving me this fact of 70 people like Rashbam to set up something right away now. Instead, according to Ramban, it's really setting up the big picture of the whole book of Shemot, not just the immediate story of them becoming slaves, but in general, the idea that Shemot is the book that goes from Galut to Geula. So for that larger theme, we need to understand how the Jews got to be in Egypt, in order to understand how they're now in a state of galut from which God will redeem them.